Hi, everyone. This is the Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Today, I am speaking with such leader in Chief Ray Aguirre. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Heather Younger with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and I'm very excited today to have Ray Aguirre on the podcast. He is an amazing leader. I was really thankful to be able to be a part of his team, I guess, for a talk I did a couple weeks ago as a part of a team building. And one thing that I noticed just in working with him leading up to that in the discussions, it's that prerequisite I talk about often, which is leaders, first and foremost, have to care. You have to be emotionally aware of where you are as a leader. You have to be aware of what's going on with your team. And he hit me right off as someone who completely understood that and was trying to meet the team where they were. At the same time, he was kind of holding his line to know exactly how far he might want to go, where he wanted to push and pull. It was just, he just demonstrated a lot of emotional intelligence. So that's what my show is about. And so thank you for coming on, Ray.
Oh, I'm glad to be on your podcast, Heather, and thank you for the invite.
So where are you, for the listeners, where are you at right now in your leadership journey?
Well, I'm currently in my 6th month as the police chief for the California State University-Fullerton Police Department. I've been in law enforcement for going 22 years, and a big chunk of that was being a supervisor and manager for various police departments. Prior to the last 6 months, I was a police chief down in San Diego for a college police department, and I did that for 4 years. And prior to that, I was a police chief in the San Jose area for about 8 years. And I rose up the ranks, started up in the Bay Area as a police officer for a mid-sized police department in Silicon Valley. I rose up the ranks, made sergeant, and eventually became a police chief. So you're right about the emotional intelligence component. I believe that's critical as a leader, as a good leader. You've got to be on top of that with your men and women. And I've seen and I've experienced through my career how many quote-unquote leaders lack that intelligence, and that's where their brand of management really fails. Is them being unable to gauge where their men and women are coming from, and that's critical.
Yes, that's interesting, because so when we think about emotional intelligence, there's kind of different components of it, and one of them being the emotional self-awareness of the leader themselves, and then this idea of social intelligence, which is what you're talking about, which is the awareness of what's happening, in your case, the men and women that are under your charge, figuring out what's going on with them emotionally, what's happening with their feelings, and all of that through change and everything. And so again, that's the thing that struck me, is that your social intelligence was really up there. And I think it's key when you think about particularly the role of just a police force, law enforcement, and the community, and that awareness of how community may be perceiving you and your actions. For you to be so aware in that area, I think is amazing, because then after that, it's about what plans do you put in place, what things do you do to actually impact that in a positive way. So I can appreciate that about you for sure.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
So when we think about leading, usually it starts from somewhere. People are driven to lead from, maybe there's a story, a person, a parent. What is it that drives you to lead other people?
Wow, you're really getting into the tough questions, aren't you, Heather?
I
And
go
and
deep, man.
really,
I go deep. You know that.
yes, you do, and that's why I got you to and got you involved with my department retreat. I've asked myself this question many times in my career and my lifetime, and really, I'm very fortunate to say that I had really stable and good role models, primarily my parents. My dad was in the military, and a good balance to that was my mother, who was a social worker. And the regimented component of my dad's profession and his lifestyle, um, I really appreciated in the sense that the order, the regimented way of doing things, the that was really very attractive to me. And and then on the flip side, I saw my mom's social intelligence, um, which was a good balance to keeping my dad in line, I guess. And a combination of that and a combination of both perspectives really prepared me to pursue my career in law enforcement. It really did. Not to say that anybody outside of those experiences fails in law enforcement, not at all. But I think those two experiences throughout my lifetime, up until they passed away, and even the legacy of their lives, um, continued on to get me to where I am. So I'm very thankful for that experience.
Hmm. You said something key, and is I'm going to go off a little bit, but I think it's interesting. This idea of leadership legacy. I think as leaders, we get to choose which legacy we leave because we may not stay in the organization forever. Number one, we're not going to be on this earth forever. So one way or another,
Right.
we're leaving a legacy, and how purposeful we are in leaving that. The biggest thing is that someone's always watching, and I say this a lot on the show, and so do my guests, that someone's always watching us, and it's up to us to choose what it is they see and what it is they hear from us. And this idea of legacy, where when I'm gone, what does the organization have that shows that I was there? What do the people have that shows that I was in their presence? And so this is just a really key point you make here, with your parents. And I know I can sense this with you. It's the same for you. You want to make that mark. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you. And we as leaders have different priorities in terms of leaving a legacy. And honestly, I don't. I'll be honest with you, Heather. I don't really think much about leaving a legacy. I do my work primarily focusing on what I believe is the best thing for the organization as the leader, and how I can provide what I believe are the needs of the department, whether they're individual needs or collectively as an organization. Um, and I'm guided by a set of principles, and maybe this is the legacy that eventually I'll be known for. But the principles of fairness, um, respect, compassion, and in our line of work, obviously, throughout across many professions, is professionalism. I think those are key. And again, I base that on my past experiences with growing up with my folks and the organizations I've been part of in the past, both going through really good leaders that I epitomized and that served as positive role models and mentors for me. And at the same time, going through really, really bad, well, in my mind, bad leaders, whom I, saw as examples of not what to be and not what to do, how not to do things with your organizations. So that would be my, I guess, legacy that
Absolutely.
I would like to leave.
What I find is leaders like you, which is why you're on the show, are those who they're not like going around trying to be all of that in a bag of chips. They're really like being on the front of the Wall Street Journal of, just being the greatest this or that. The idea is that you're impacting people's lives one at a time. And it's mostly by how you act, how you walk about your journey. And they're watching and they're emulating. So that's really where the legacy is at, right? And that's what I appreciate.
Absolutely. The being constantly watched and not in a negative way. In law enforcement, we're scrutinized all the time, as you know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the bad press, especially for law enforcement, the negativity that's brought to light with rogue police officers and what we do and what we don't do. But outside of that, you've got the rank and file and members of your organization that are looking at you and really looking at you to serve as their guide. And that's an integral part of my role in any organizational leader's role, is to set a good example. And my philosophy is that I won't send anybody out to do anything that I can't do, and that has to come from the top. And when they see that, they know that you're in there with them through thick and thin, and that for me, that's critical. And you see that a lot with private corporations and CEOs who are willing to get down and dirty with their troops and their men and women doing the hard, laborious tasks. You see that in the military all the time. You've got command staff and command rank leaders, generals who are willing to go get down and dirty because they know how it is, because they've experienced it. And that really sends a positive and an inspiring message to the men and women of an organization, that you're not too high enough, that you can't do these things that you ask them to do on a daily basis.
That's great. Yeah, I think about that from just leaders and organizations. And there are some I know that are kind of, people may perceive them up in an ivory tower or perceive them, really removed from what's happening day to day. And I always saw my job as trying to help them understand that perception and trying to bridge the gap to bring them closer to their people. Because I do believe, as you just said, that it's in that close connection and then realizing that you are willing to get there, that true loyalty is built. That's where you have better retention. That's where you have more performance and productivity coming from it. So yeah, it's good stuff. So
I completely agree.
So let's think of a time, because I'm sure everybody listening can tell that you're just amazing. And again, none of us are perfect. But one thing I do love to have all of my guests do is to recount for the people listening a time when you weren't the best version of yourself. You weren't that best leader. A specific story, if you can think of one, where you just said, "Oh, I really kind of messed up here." And then how did you come out of that to kind of be refreshed in the leader you are today?
I tell you, Heather, I don't think there's one single incident that I can really just pull out, because it's been a gradual learning process for me, even to this day, how to become an effective leader and a police chief. But if it's one single incident, I can only think of when I started as a police chief. It was a totally new way of looking at things, because I had always seen the organization as being part and parcel of the operational component and managing teams of half dozen folks. But then, I became a police chief, and then I had to get the macro view of an organization, and that really taught me a lot of things. That it's, although the things that are so obvious in terms of law enforcement is critical, the bread and butter of law enforcement, patrol, seeing police officers out there in police cars and bicycles and motorcycles making arrests, that's all important, that's critical. But then as a police chief, you see all the different components of what makes an organization run, a police organization run. You've got the support staff, you've got your civilian employees, you've got administrative personnel, you've got HR personnel, you've got dispatchers, and everybody in between. And then you start to realize that, wow, this is just more than hooking and booking people on a daily basis, and going to job fairs and saying hi and pinching babies' cheeks out in public, and that was a sobering sort of time for me, where I almost felt like it was overwhelming, and where I may have failed was not having known how to balance that effectively. I was very operationally oriented prior to becoming a police chief, and so my entire effort was concentrated on that. And as a result of that, I didn't put enough attention on the other components of my organization, the civilian staff, the dispatchers, the support staff, and things didn't flow quite as well as they should have if I had been able to balance all that effectively. But I've learned through those mistakes that as a leader of an organization, and however large or small those organizations are, you've got to take all those components of your organization into account. Some that you may need to put a little more effort on and attention on, but nonetheless, all of them require really diligent and close attention, so that the wheel runs as smoothly as possible.
How do you do that? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening right now, like you said, whether it's a smaller or medium or large organization, there's always that time management or that balance, that struggle to try to make sure we have all the balls in the air with none of them falling, and everybody kind of, you have this like a pulse on the organization. How do you manage to do that? Because you didn't even include the community representatives, other partners that are within this the state system. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in your world.
Yeah, you're right. I only talked about the organization, but all the players outside of the organization, the community, the university, and the local community where we're at, all those you also need to take into consideration. I think self-discipline is critical on the leader. You have to know what your priorities are. As easy as it may sound, you can't let your emotions rule you. You've got to stay on task, and you've got to set your priorities, and you've got to be really, really disciplined on setting those priorities. And a critical element of, in my mind, what a good leader does is you've got to have a competent staff, because you've got to be able to delegate and trust that when you delegate tasks, and you can't do everything, got a competent staff that'll carry out the mission for you. And so, the business continuity and the succession planning and is part and parcel of developing your staff, because like you said, we're not going to be around forever. I'm not going to be a police chief forever. I'm not going to be in law enforcement forever. And the day I retire, I need to feel confident that I've paved the way for the next generation of leaders as best as I could have, and making sure that enables the organization to continue as smoothly as possible. And sometimes we forget that as well. Ego among many organizational leaders gets in the way, and the lack of trust to develop their subordinates and their staffs is so strong with many organizational leaders that they fail to develop that. And when it's time for that person to leave, you've got an organization that's in limbo. It's like, okay, well, now what do we do? And it's incumbent upon me to help develop that next generation of people to have the skills and the resources to move on the organization to the next generation.
Well, it sounds like you have absolutely grown up inside of your role.
No, I
what you're talking about now, right? It's not just about ops, but it's that whole macro global view of things, and you had to grow into that and
absolutely
understand that. So that's good. So okay, now what happens? I know I have a little bit of a view into this because I took part in that department retreat. But
yeah,
what are the ways when you feel there's a disconnect? You just like, wow, everybody's all over the place, everybody's achieving things, but you're really not connected to the team. What do you do, particularly with your direct reports? What do you do to reconnect with them in a deeper way?
It's so easy to, I remember the Dragnet series, just the facts, ma'am. It's easy to be in that mindset. But to be an effective leader in this day and age, you've got to get yourself involved in your staff and your direct reports' lives, and get to know them as human beings and as individuals, as mothers, fathers, as uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters. That's critical. And I've always believed that if your subordinates, if your men and women know that you truly are interested in what goes on their lives on a personal level, they'll be much better performers at work for you. Not to mention, building the trust and confidence they have for you goes a long way. So I always try and start my meetings with trying to find out from my staff, my direct reports, what happened with them for the previous week or the past weekend, what they did, what type of things they were involved with their families, with their loved ones. And that's always a good segue to getting down and dirty to the business at hand. And to me, that's a good way to recharge and reconnect with your men and women. And that's not only true for my direct reports, but everybody I come across at work as best as I can. I ask them how they're doing with their lives. And I know some of my men and women have personal issues they're having. Some of them have pending divorces. Some have ailing family members. I make it a point that, and this is just my personal practice, is that I send a birthday card to every member of my department when it's their birthday. I've done that since I got here, and I have a list in front of me actually that has their name down and their birthday. And I ask my assistant to make sure that there's a card ready for me to sign, and we ship it out. And whenever they have a family member pass away, or a relative in the hospital, or they themselves in the hospital, I make sure that we reach out to them and see how they're doing, and we send them flowers. It's really important that the men and women of your organization know that the leadership cares about them, especially with the hard work they're doing day in and day out. It can be tedious when they have to go through the daily grind and not feel any type of appreciation. I may not be able to give them awards on a regular basis, although we do have that. We have annual awards for our employees, but outside of that, it's these little gestures, I believe, that really count.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. I think organizations focus too much on ping pong tables or, free drinks in the fridge, whatever that is. And while those I can guarantee you that alone is not keeping them with you. The stuff that you're talking about, though, that's really the stuff of great relationships, and you're right, building trust and confidence. When you reach out, and I love the fact that with this group of men and women, and I've seen them, and I know there's like this toughness about them, but at the beginning of your meetings, you start off with, what's happening this last with your families. That's just kind of unheard of. And then getting into business after that. I mean, it's brilliant. I know you're not doing it for the brilliance of it. That's just who you are. But hopefully those who are listening can take a little direction from that, because it doesn't cost you a thing to do that, but it goes a long way for sure.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And again, yes, to everybody who's listening, try it and you'll see the fruits of it in one way or another. A little smile from your staff will give you that awareness that, yeah, it's making an impact.
So on top of this, because these are really good nuggets, and I think some of it's a little nuanced from what we've heard in the past from people on the show. So I usually like to let people, last thing you tell them is maybe a word of wisdom, word of advice, piece of knowledge that if there's a leader, just struggling in their leadership career or their journey, they just need to hear something that peps them up, something they should do, like one or two critical pieces that they should do. What might that be? And one of them you just talked about, which I think was really good, very tactical things. What might be something else you might want to leave the leadership listeners with?
If there's a leader that might be in a quandary right now, just know that you're there for a reason. You were selected, you were chosen. Even if you inherited the position, you're there for a reason. Don't lose faith of your capabilities. You can do it. And if you feel overwhelmed or that you don't have appropriate skill sets, go seek a mentor. Mentorship is so important, and it's been so critical in my career to find the right people with the right attitude and with the right experience to help guide you. And when we talk about mentors, sometimes we classify them as those that are more senior to us because of the experience, but that's not necessarily the case. You may even find mentors younger than you and less experienced than you, but those that have the right mindset. You talked about this, Heather, the right mindset, but you got to go seek them out. If you're in a quandary, in a dilemma right now, and what the next steps are to lead effectively, go seek them out. But don't ever lose faith that you cannot do it. You can, because you have a purpose, and your purpose is there to lead your organization.
Love that. That was a great ending quote. So for those who are listening, if they wanted to get a hold of you for some, just follow up on this. I don't know how many people actually do that, but if there's one way they can follow up with you after the show, how might that be?
A couple of ways. They can always go to our website at Cal State Fullerton, and if they just pull up the Cal State University-Fullerton Police Department website, it'll immediately direct them to the University Police Department, and they'll have an email address and a phone number that they can reach me if they wanted to. We're also pretty active via social media, so same way. If you just plug in California State University-Fullerton Police Department, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they can currently see all the photos I brought back from Scotland on social media. So
I'm going to have to go check that out now. Okay.
Yeah, check it out, Heather. Check it out.
I didn't know that, because Scotland is up there. It's like I've got, like the top 3 or 4 list of places to go, and that's one of them. So yay.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can encourage people, go. And if you're a big whiskey person, you're going to love Scotland.
Well, this has been great, Ray. I really appreciate it. This is a kind of like the cherry on top for the kind of the beginning of our business relationships. I really appreciate you giving the listeners all this good stuff. For those who are listening, if you really enjoyed this, please do go ahead and rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen. Here's the thing. The more people rate and review it, the more it goes to the top of the list for those looking for leadership podcasts. And they get to hear the stories and all the good stuff that you got from today with many of the guests that are on the show. So go ahead and do that. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Ray. It's been awesome.
Likewise, thank you to you, Heather, and for all that you brought to my organization.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.